Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. It is Friday, July 5th. It being Friday means it's the best day of the week. It is Fitness Athlete Friday, and I'm your host, Zach Long. I'm here today to talk to you about one of our favorite loading strategies that the faculty inside the Fitness Athlete division likes to use with fitness athletes and all populations, actually. And it's eccentric isometrics are just a great way to start introducing some loading to individuals for a number of reasons that we'll get to in just a minute. But before we get to that, I want to mention that we have two upcoming chances to see the Fitness Athlete live course. Next weekend, July 13th and 14th, Mitch will be in Cabot, Arkansas, teaching down there with Next Gym. And then on September 7th and 8th, I'll be in Mars, Pennsylvania, talking up there. So two chances coming up in the next couple months to check out the Fitness Athlete live course. So let's jump into eccentric isometrics and why we believe this is such an important loading strategy to be using in your plan of care with patients. So what are eccentric isometrics? So they're just a lifting technique where basically we slow down the eccentric and we add an isometric contraction to the movement. So what this might look like if we're doing a squat, we might do anywhere from a 3 to 7 second eccentric muscle contraction lowering down into the squat. And then when we get to the bottom of the squat, we might pause there for 1 to 5 seconds to spend a little bit more time down in the bottom of the hole. And then the concentric portion of the lift, we are going to do as rapidly as possible. So slow eccentric, an isometric pause at the bottom of the rep, and then really rapidly going to a concentric muscle contraction. So let's dive into why we like this so much, a couple of the benefits of it. Number one, from a mobility perspective, we see really good outcomes as far as our ability to improve somebody's mobility, their flexibility, the range of motion that they can get through. So the research is pretty clear that eccentric muscle contractions do a really great job of actually lengthening our muscles and creating true tissue changes to increase range of motion. And so obviously spending some time doing that slow eccentric that we see in the eccentric isometric is going to fall in line with that research there to help improve our mobility. We also find a lot of people that when it comes to doing an active motion, they kind of lack control at the bottom position of a certain movement. Let's take the squat, for example. They squat down, and even though they have great ankle and hip mobility, they don't know how to coordinate all their muscle contractions together there. And so they get down to the bottom that isn't actually anywhere near true in range of motion for where their joints have the capacity to move. So they lack some active mobility there. And so by doing an eccentric, isometric, and spending some time doing that isometric contraction down in the bottom, so often we see that people learn how to actually engage the right stuff down in the bottom of their squat. A little bit of motor learning happens there, and very rapidly they improve how much motion they can actually perform a more functional movement through, such as a squat. Benefit number two is there's significant time under tension when we perform eccentric isometrics. So each one of these reps with that slow eccentric contraction and slow isometric is going to take a little while. And so I think this is really positive, especially in the fitness athlete population, where so commonly, if we're looking at what CrossFitters and Olympic lifters are doing, they're performing these really rapid movements done as fast as possible, never really slowing movements down and getting time under tension. And we know from a lot of other research that time under tension and slow contractions can be really good for beefing up tendons and making tendons a little bit stronger. And so I really, really think it's important for CrossFitters for a period of time during the year to spend some time working on some tempo work, especially if they're coming from CrossFit without having, any real lifting background. That month-long period of doing some slow eccentric isometrics with their squats can really help bulletproof them for a little while, I believe. By increasing that time under tension, we're also going to see some positive hypertrophy benefits. We'll see some positive strength benefits. So I think it's important there from actually creating the changes that we want when we prescribe exercise. And also a lot of clinics now are understanding the need to have more weights or better equipment to create true strength changes in their patients. And maybe you're somebody that's falling into that category, but your clinic hasn't yet been able to invest in a large amount of weight. So maybe the best option you have is 225-pound dumbbells for 50 pounds total, which isn't a whole lot of weight if somebody comes into you with a really athletic background. But by doing this slow tempo, you can make a lot of movements significantly more challenging. So it's a great way to keep the intensity, the effort high of exercises, even when you don't have a whole lot of equipment. But I do want to kind of asterisk that by saying eccentric isometrics are not always going to be light. So don't think that just because we're doing this slow tempo that we can't load really heavy. I regularly program people doing eccentric isometrics at weights as heavy as 90% of their 1 rep max. So we can go incredibly heavy with it. 2 other benefits with eccentric isometrics. Number 1, motor learning. So by slowing the movement down, let's say we've been given an athlete a cue for a period of time, whether that's a verbal, a visual, or a tactile cue, and we're trying to get them to actually implement that into the movements by slowing things down, doing that slow eccentric, slow isometric. It gives them a little bit of time to kind of figure out and put together the different cues that you've given them to try to improve their movement patterns. And then we also have a great opportunity with this slow time under tension movement to allow an individual to kind of self-figure out some things from a symptom modification process. So let's say Jimmy's squatting down, he's having a little patellofemoral pain, Jimmy's knees starting to come into a little bit of valgus, and Jimmy starts to become a little bit symptomatic. Now because he's doing that slow eccentric, he can play around with pushing his knees out more. He can play around with shifting his hips back or pushing his knees forward a little bit more. He has time to make little minor alterations in his movement pattern to see if he can modify his symptoms so that even while he's dealing with this moderate patellofemoral pain, he can continue to stay active. I think it's great from a symptom modification procedure standpoint in letting individuals kind of take ownership of their own progression and figuring out what they specifically need to do to help improve their pain and stay active. So let's go through a couple examples of how I would use eccentric isometrics in the clinic. We already talked about squat and kind of having somebody slowly squat down while they spend time thinking about the cues that we've discussed with them, or they spend some time trying to figure out what they need to do to change their movement to modify their own symptoms. So the squat's a pretty straightforward one. Another thing that obviously we all see very commonly is individuals that come to us with back pain and with hamstring inflexibility. And at times those two can be correlated with each other. Take somebody that's maybe flexion intolerant in their low back and they're having to repeatedly pick things up off the ground. And so every time they go to pick up something off the ground, they have to go through a lot of flexion of their spine, and that is symptomatic right now. So right now, while we're not concerned about them flexing their spine long term, right now we want to find some ways to get them moving a little bit better without pain. Maybe we feel like improving their hamstring flexibility will help. Well, Romanian deadlifts performed with the eccentric isometric kind of loading process there can be a great way to accomplish 2 really important goals for us. By doing that slow eccentric and isometric, we're obviously going to get a good effect on hamstring flexibility. The second thing we're going to get, if you've been paying attention to ice for a while, you know we're really big on people with low back pain need to deadlift. They need to deadlift. They need to get their low back stronger. They need to make a more resilient back. And so Romanian deadlifts with the eccentric isometric muscle contraction is a fantastic way to start adding some loading to the low back to work on improving their low back strength. Another example that I use really, really commonly that I don't see a whole lot of other people use that I think we should use more often is eccentric isometrics in the pull-up. So I've done a couple podcasts on the PT on Ice Daily Show discussing the CrossFit shoulder. I did one, I think, like 3 or 4 weeks ago, a case study on that. But I see a lot of individuals that aren't building up enough pull-up strength and pull-up control. And so when they go as a CrossFitter into doing kipping pull-ups and more dynamic movements such as that, they lack that in-range control and they end up becoming a little symptomatic in their shoulder. And so one thing that I really like with this population is doing an eccentric isometric. So they slowly do that eccentric right before they actually get down to the bottom position of the pull-up. They're actually staying engaged and they're holding that for a few seconds. And just using that eccentric isometric to build a little bit more strength in that long eccentric that we see with a pull-up, and then really by that isometric getting better control down in that bottom position of the pull-up. So eccentric isometrics, great way to start introducing a different parameter for loading in the clinic. Really hope that if you haven't started using these already, that you play around with them because they are absolutely fantastic and you'll see some wonderful outcomes with your patients when you start to adjust the loading a little bit to use EIs. Hope everybody has a great day. Hope to see you at future courses.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.